I'm going to start this series with introduction to Cisco Identity Services Engine. We're going to make an overview of the entire platform. ISE can be defined as a next generation solution for identity management. It's sort of like a combination of the old style ACS with network admission control and some more sophisticated features. It is much more powerful than ACS, and it is actually acting as a replacement for the Cisco access control system. I'm going to start this session with a high-level overview of the advantages offered by ISE, and then we will take a look at the actual features or the services that we may want to enable on this platform. ISE is a context-based access solution, meaning that it provides access to the sophisticated identity data, identity of the endpoint or the user connecting to the network. So things like location, like time, like type of access, wired versus wireless, maybe the protocol used during the connection to establish the session, stuff like health of the unit, type of the device used for connection. All this information will be accessible. ISE is going to provide this information, of course, assuming that it was configured to do so. And this information is what we will then eventually use in our policies to provide granular access to the network, or possibly also to the network devices themselves. ISE is capable of using what is known as profiling services, which is going to severely enhance visibility into who, what, and when is connecting to our network. We will be able to tell the type of the device, such as an iPhone versus, let's say, iPad, or maybe a corporate versus non-corporate device. Another thing that we will be heavily relying on as we build our policies. ISE provides centralized services for management and network access. With Identity Services Engine, there's going to be just one unit, one so-called ISE node that we will use for administration. And this is how we will deploy our services. Some other advantages of this Cisco platform. Well, many organizations use this system to enable guest services and also to better manage connecting endpoints. We will get back to this stuff later in this session. Another thing I want to discuss is the flavors of ISE. There are essentially two types of appliances as how we can deploy this solution. We can go for physical 3600 series, known as Secure Network Servers, SNS, or as an alternative, we can go for virtual instances running on ESXi, VMware, maybe Red Hat KVM, or finally Microsoft Hyper-V. With the virtual appliances, it's going to be the same exact logic as with any other type of virtual systems. It's going to be us who will eventually specify the resources we want to allocate for our system. And this is going to eventually control the number of, in case of ISE, it's going to be the number of endpoints that the instance can support. Now, in case of physical appliances, this is all predefined because the resources are fixed. They are part of the actual hardware. We take a look at this in the documentation. I'm gonna go to security and then Identity Services Engine. I should be able to show you datasheet for ISE. We will get back to the documentation later down this session, but let me just try to find I think it's going to be datasheets, and I'm looking for, it's going to be Cisco Secure Network Server datasheet, this one. We've got 3 individual platforms, 3615, Now this one over here, we've got 3655 and finally 3695. And of course, the differences between them, it's all about how large the deployment is going to be when you plan to use one or another unit. So it's all about the size of the deployment, I should say, and it's all about the number of supported endpoints. If you take a look at these three, we've got 3615, which is running with the aid of 8 CPU cores versus 12 for 3655 and also 12 for 3695. Okay, so the last two, they have the same number of cores. Another difference is in the memory, 32 versus 96 versus 256 gigs of RAM. And there is also the difference between the hard disks, hard drives. Note that the last two, 3655 and 3695, they've got redundant components such as hard disks and also power supplies, which makes them more suitable for larger deployments that require highly reliable system configurations. And now looking at the number of supported endpoints, so the devices that will be connecting to our network that ISE is going to eventually control. Okay, the number of supported endpoints depends on the type of deployment, standalone versus a so-called distributed mode. In a standalone deployment, which is when you use just a single ISE node, single ISE unit, with 3615, we can handle just 10,000 endpoints versus 25,000 and finally 50,000 for 3655 and 3695 respectively. And if this was the distributed deployment, the lowest platform, it still handles 10,000 devices. We see an increase for 3655 and 3695, 50,000 and 100,000 endpoints respectively. That's the differences between the physical appliances. With virtual appliances, it's going to be you who allocates resources. So if you plan to go for, let's say, 50,000 endpoints in the distributed mode, you'll have to allocate the same resources as what 3655 appliance supports. Now looking at the actual features as of ISE 2.4, features and services that you can run on this platform, it will be first and foremost centralized management / administration and AAA for network access. Okay, what it means is that you can not only use ISE to control access to the network devices themselves, such as your routers, switches, firewalls, like when you do a device administration with TechX Plus, but you can also use it for network access with radius. And it's going to be a centralized deployment. As I said, we will have just one unit that we will use for configuration. And the configuration will be then eventually replicated to other nodes, of course, assuming that we are running the distributed mode. ISE policies, they are defined, configured using the modern rule-based approach. And we will talk about policies in another session. We will be also able to integrate ISE with several different types of external databases, such as Active Directory, maybe LDAP, and some more. All these three elements, roles, security protocols, and databases, this all goes under centralized management and AAA. Another thing we may want to use on ISE is profiling, which is a special engine offered by ISE to use to classify connecting devices, to be able to distinguish between the device types, such as Apple devices versus Android endpoints, maybe corporate, non-corporate assets in general, The ISE is going to be looking at the attributes collected for the connecting endpoint, analyzing them, and associating with one of the predefined profiles downloaded from Cisco to tell you what type of device you are dealing with. Bring your own device is one of the common use cases for ISE. ISE offers flexible features, components that make bring your own device deployments pretty easy to handle, but makes the deployments secure and also pretty flexible. We may want to use ISE to separate guest access from regular access provided to our employees. The guest services is all about providing connectivity to users that are not part of our organization, such as guests, such as contractors, maybe external partners. It is possible to build separate policies for that type of users, and this will also provide dedicated network access, limited access to our network. We can use ISE to do posture assessment, which is a method of verifying health of the connecting endpoint. Stuff like operating system patches, like the existence or lack of a certain software, anti-malware, maybe antivirus software. We can also use it to check for disk encryption, verify registry settings, and do some other things associated with the underlying operating system of the endpoint. We can also use ISE to deploy an advanced segmentation mechanism called TrustSec, which is based on so-called security group tags. Another thing we can enable on ISE is platform exchange grid, integration using PX Grid, which is a method of communicating our identity services engine with other Cisco appliances, such as WSA, maybe FMC, or even with systems created by different vendors in order to exchange data between those systems. And this information is then something that we will be able to add and use in our policies. And now, last but not the least, another important feature of ISE 2.4, a certificate for the internal CA service. We can use ISE to provide certificate services, and those certificates in most cases will be handed to our endpoints, or you could also use this feature to support PX Grid integrations. These two are the most common use cases for the internal CA on ISE. Before we finish, I want to go back to the documentation for a second. As I showed you previously, you will have to go to the main Cisco doc portal, then click on security and navigate to Identity Services Engine. And as you can see here, you could access the documentation for individual versions of the ISE code. But what I would go ahead and start with would be the documentation roadmap. I'm going to open up the 2.4 document. The reason I want to show you the roadmaps is that there are actually several different types of ISE documents. We've got the admin guide, which is the most important document for us. But there is also the installation guide, upgrade guide, migration guide, ACS to ISE. We've got sponsor portal user guide, which is for guest services. There is the command line reference guide. If you want to learn about the syntax of the CLI commands. We've got API for programmability and integrations, and there is also the component compatibility doc. And there is even open source used in Identity Services Engine. Okay, as I said, admin guide is going to be the most important one. Then as you do the installation, you would also want to take a look at this one, and then one for upgrades. These three are the most commonly used docs, I would say. Okay, so the installation guide is going to tell you how to deal with physical and virtual appliances as you do the installation. It is going to get you for the procedure. It also contains the ISE ports reference, so you know what communication you want to open. This is actually a pretty nice picture that shows you the different ports and types of flows that you will see as you deploy Identity Services Engine. And then the upgrade guide is when you change the code, when you go up, let's say upgrade from 2.4 maybe to 2.7. The admin guide, let's get back to this one. Let me see what document we're gonna get when we go from the roadmap. Okay, so it's the old style configuration guide. Now, if I were to go back one step, back to the main ISE documentation page, if we were to go to the configuration guides, which is another place how we can access the administrator guides, we go to 2.4, we open this document. As you can see, this one actually gets you to a slightly different book. It's what Cisco calls a workflow-based documentation. You've got those different icons, which are sort of equivalents of the sections in the old style reference. We also have release notes, API docs, stuff like that, command line documents. So I guess that this is actually supposed to be the same as what we see inside of the old style document. But what I noticed is that, well, I don't really know if Cisco is gonna keep doing the transition, is gonna keep changing from the old style to the new look for those ISE guides. But what I found out is that not all sections of the old document were actually moved to the workflow-based docs. Now also, if you take a look at one of these, let's take a look at device administration over here, and let's try to find an equivalent in the old document. It's gonna be under enable and configure Cisco ISE services. Oh no, it's not gonna be here. Let's take a look at manage users. Set up Cisco ISE management access is gonna be here. Control device administration using TechX Plus. Okay, so this section is meant to be an equivalent of what we see here. But if you take a look at the content, you will notice that it's slightly reordered in this new workflow-based document. Let's take a look at this over here. We've got configure global TechX Plus settings at the end of the old style document. Okay, we also have it here. I think that they actually made an upgrade recently. But the thing is that it's not the same order what you see here versus what you got in the old doc. And the content appears to be slightly different. Well, in this case, it's probably the same content. It's just a different table of contents. But again, as I said, in some other cases, this new configuration guide, it says November 6, 2019 versus the old doc dates for January 23, 2020. So this one appears to be more up to date. If I was new to ISE and I didn't have experience with the old doc, I would be probably going for both, the old and the new one. Now, if we look at the latest release, which is at the time of making this recording 2.7, okay, 2.7 is listed using the old approach. So I'm not really sure if Cisco is going to eventually translate those old style documents to the workflow-based papers. And until they eventually unify the documents, I would probably want to look at both just to make sure that I don't miss a thing in one or another document.